Welcome to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine's fiction podcast. I'm EQMM's editor, Janet Hutchings. This month our selection is by a writer who grew up in Mumbai, India, and currently lives in Virginia, Smita Harish Jain. Her short stories have appeared in many anthologies, including the Mystery Writers of America's most recent collection, When a Stranger Comes to Town, and the latest anthology from the Mouse Domestic Convention, Mystery Most Diabolical. A talented newcomer to EQMM, whose first story for us made the top 10 list for the 2021 Readers Award, she's chosen to read for this podcast her second EQMM story, which appears in our current issue, May-June 2022. Here is Smita Harish Jain reading her story, The Manglik Curse.
Come, come, Vijay Panditji, my father said, ushering the astrologer into our drawing room. The man, now in his 90s, had arranged every marriage in my family for 3 generations. Robed in a marigold yellow kurta and dhoti set, with a necklace of wooden beads encircling his sequin collar, he looked more like a Bollywood A-lister than a renowned mystic. My parents had employed him to match my natal chart to that of Prem Mukherjee, sole heir to the Mukherjee Textile Corporation, and their first choice to be my husband. The planets are most auspicious, Surajji, the astrologer said, adding the honorific G when addressing my father. At 95, Vijay Panditji no longer needed to acknowledge anyone as his superior. I suspected the respect he was showing was for my father's bank account. Most auspicious, he repeated. Your daughter will have a very good second marriage. Second marriage? My mother somehow shouted and gasped at the same time. Yes, it is clearly written in her stars. Her first husband will die within 6 months of the wedding, he said matter-of-factly. As my parents struggled to collect their words, my father tugging at the tips of his imperial mustache and my mother fanning herself with the pallu of her sari, I did a silent cheer. Nitin and I could finally be together. We cannot have our daughter become damaged goods, my father said, waving his hands over his lower extremities to suggest that once I was no longer a virgin, my choices for a second marriage would be extremely limited. Who will take her after that happens? Yes, who, my mother added unnecessarily. I had not been burdened by my virginity for years, but that was not known to my parents, of course. I never wanted an arranged marriage and had been complaining about the prospect since I was 3 years old, according to my mother. She marched into the kitchen wearing only her knickers and announced that her father and I needn't find her a husband. She would take care of it herself. My mother told that story to her friends whenever they asked about the search, and then they all laughed and laughed as if I had said the most absurd thing possible. As long as she does not become with child, she will have a successful second marriage, the astrologer said. My mother shook her head. This cannot be, Panditji. Anju is so small and delicate, like a doll. There must be a mistake. Did she really think my size could offset a cosmic flaw in my natal chart? The old man spread the astrological diagrams on the jelly table before him and showed us the unlucky placement of my planets. Anju's Mars is in her 8th house. You see here? He pointed to a spot inside my ascendant table, then nodded as if he had told us everything we needed to know. What does that mean? My father shouted. Panditji sighed and returned to my kundali. The 8th house is the death house, Surajji. Any girl having Mars there will undoubtedly face passion and upheaval in her first marriage. It is the nature of the god of war, na? He said. What are you saying, Panditji, that we cannot find a match for Anju? My mother asked. I am saying your daughter is Manglik, madam. You must address this problem in her kundali before fixing her marriage to anyone. My mother's shoulders dropped. My daughter will be a kumwar, an old maid. Why is this happening to me? Then, as if just remembering something, Vijay Panditji reached inside his cloth bag and pulled out a second kundali. This, he said, thrusting the roll of paper into the air, this is the answer. My parents looked at each other and smiled tentatively. Anju and Prem are getting only 16 points because of the Manglik Curse. In the second marriage, with this boy from Bangalore, the astrologer pointed at the chart he was holding, they will get full points from the stars, the maximum of 36. He glanced from my mother to my father and back to my mother, but neither one of my parents seemed convinced. I knew what they were thinking. Why would this Bangalore boy want me when he could have a pure girl? The image of my father pointing to his genitals played before me. As if reading my parents' minds, Panditji said, The name of the Mahajans is well known throughout the country. They will be glad to be in your family one way or another. In fact, he reached back inside his bag and pulled out several more rolls. Anju is having many options for her second marriage. My parents breathed a sigh of relief. If I married Prem, I would be taken care of by his parents, even after he died. If his parents decided to find a different girl for Prem, we had plenty of options. Whatever happened, I knew one thing. I would have a second husband, but it would not be this boy from Bangalore or any of the others Panditji had presented. Prem's parents turned pale when the astrologer explained the meaning of the birth charts to them, their chances of securing a match with my family quickly fading. "Kunal, bring water with lots of ice," my mother shouted in the direction of the kitchen. Kunal was one of my family's maidservants and also Nitin's former lover. She knew he had left her for me, but as a servant, she had little recourse but to accept it. If she even hinted that I might be having a romantic relationship with our family's driver, she would be beaten and removed from the premises. Unfortunately for her, she had to keep her hatred for me bottled up. "But the biodaters are perfectly matched, na?" Prem's mother said after drinking 2 goblets of ice water. These personal resumes that start the matchmaking process contain details about each marriage candidate. Will accept dark skin, has completed a BA in accountancy, enjoys housework. She was right that, if not for the stars, Prem and I seemed an ideal couple. "What can be done, Panditji? Surely there is a way to appease the heavens." Prem's father looked desperate. As the only daughter of the wealthiest family in the village, I was a sought-after match. My dowry alone would be worth more than most village families would earn in a lifetime. Even with the astrologer's warning about the Manglik Curse, the Mukherjees would not give up so easily. "Sir, the Kundali is set at a person's birth, and it gives certain information, certain possibilities. The interpretation of the information is left to astrologers, and it is only that, my interpretation of what the stars are telling," Vijay Panditji explained, seeming annoyed that his assessment would be challenged by a layman. "So, you are saying there is a chance?" My mother suddenly joined the conversation, looking the most hopeful she had since Panditji's proclamation about Mars taking up residence in my 8th house. "There are some offerings that can be made to the gods," Panditji said. Prem's parents moved to the edge of their seats, leaning toward the astrologer like children awaiting the opening of a fresh sleeve of Parle glucose biscuits to dunk into their warm milk. If you provide food for the poor and the sacred, there is a chance that the marriage will be given a reprieve and maybe even shown favor. Panditji released a trial balloon and waited for a response from any of the parents. He did not have to wait long. "We will feed 2,000 cows and the colony of lepers who live near the village, and God will bless this marriage," Prem's father declared. The faith of those who left coconuts and flower garlands at temples and did good deeds on behalf of the gods was unshakable and sometimes the only thing that kept them from despair. Vijay Panditji smiled nervously, as did my parents. Prem and I rolled our eyes, neither one of us believing in the superstitions of our families. "Should we do more?" Prem's mother asked, seeming uneasy about the simplicity of the solution offered by Panditji. "Maybe she can marry a tree." Everyone in the room knew what Mrs. Mukherjee meant. People who believe that the Manglik Curse will kill their spouse often marry a tree or other object so the curse falls upon it, and the Manglik is free to marry anyone he or she chooses. I have been to more than one Kum Viva ceremony where village boys and girls married a clay pot before their actual weddings. I watched as glances were exchanged between my parents and Mr. and Mrs. Mukherjee, a wordless tennis match where all the players were on the same side of the net. Were they actually considering this option? "I'm not marrying a tree." I grabbed the astrological chart and tore it in half. Kunal and her silly friend Yogita, another maidservant in our house, were standing in a corner tittering. After an admonition from my parents to be quiet, followed by the threat of a thorough beating, they ran into the kitchen, giggling the whole way. Relieved that I would not be marrying shrubbery, I left while my parents planned my wedding to Prem. "You can't just kill him, Anju," Nitin said, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Arey, Panditji is telling that Prem will die within 6 months of our wedding. No one will suspect anything," I said. I couldn't tell Nitin the real reason for my hurry, that Kunal was plotting to get him back. I saw the way she looked at him, and my upcoming wedding could be exactly what she needed to get me out of the picture. I had to show Nitin how much I loved him, so he would wait for me. "You don't even believe in the curse, and neither does Prem," Nitin said. I know, but everyone else is believing, I argued. Nitin looked unconvinced. I am Shudra Anju, a worker. Your family are wealthy Rajputs. They will never accept me, he said. They will accept you once I'm a widow. My family will be happy that anyone wants me, I said. You do not know that for certain, and it is not your place to disrupt what has been predetermined. Nitin looked upwards and tapped his head and heart 3 times to show reverence to the gods. Before we could finish our conversation, my father summoned Nitin to drive Vijay Panditji back to his house. I went straight to the kitchen to find what I needed. Kunal's voice was coming from the small alcove in the kitchen where the servants took their meals. Nitin belongs with me only, not with that Anju. She thinks she can take anything she wants because her family has money. She's getting married, nah. Once that happens, you and Nitin can get married too, and so can Sushil and I. Yogita sounded musing and dreamy when she said the name of Kunal's younger brother. I had seen Yogita flirting with Sushil and had often wondered if her friendship with Kunal was just a means to an end. Kunal and Sushil's parents died when they were still children. As the elder sibling, Kunal would be responsible for finding her brother a wife. She is jiddi, spoiled. Marriage will not keep her away from Nitin, Kunal said. She was right. I had no intention of staying married to Prem any longer than I had to. If you help me get Nitin back, I will fix your marriage to my brother, Kunal said. I had heard enough and marched into the kitchen. What are you two doing over there? I yelled at them. We are just taking our chai pani, miss, Yogita said, claiming her afternoon tea when it was only 2:00. Go to the market right now and get the vegetables for tonight's dinner, I said, needing them out of the room. Yes, miss, they said, and scurried out of the kitchen like the rats they were. Once alone, I made my way to the block of knives sitting next to the marble slab on which sugarcane stalks and coconuts were hacked for their juice. I examined each one, balancing its weight in my hand until I found what I was looking for, an 8-inch chef's knife with a hard plastic grip and a sharp steel blade. My fingers curled around its thick handle, the metal of the blade shining in the afternoon sun seeping through the kitchen windows. I hid the knife behind some canisters of tea and sugar to retrieve before the Vidai ceremony, the ritual that would mark my official departure from my ancestral home. After Kunal and Yogita packed my things, I would slip the knife inside one of the bags before they brought them to Prem's house. The 2 maidservants would stay with me for a few weeks until my new maids had learned how to take care of my needs. On the morning after the wedding, I found Prem's body in our bed, the 8-inch chef's knife I had brought with me sticking out of his chest. He and I had argued the night before when I told him I was not yet ready for our conjugal exchange. I stormed out to spend the night with Nitin, sure no one would see me leave or return. The bride and groom are always left alone on their wedding night so they can consummate their marriage. You must go back, Anju. You have a husband now, Nitin had said. I don't want to be with him, Nitin, and I will not soil myself with another man. I am only yours, I said. After several more minutes of arguing, Nitin took my hands in his. Anju, he said softly, Kunal and I are getting married, so you do not have any reason to kill Prem. I told her what you were planning, and she agrees it is for the best. Of course she does that, viper. I wanted to scream, to tell Nitin this was just a ploy that Kunal had devised to get him back, but I knew he was marrying her to protect me, to keep me from going to prison. If Nitin loved me that much, maybe there was still hope for us, I thought. Or had Kunal finally won? I was standing over the bed, peering at the knife in Prem's chest, when my new maidservants, with Kunal and Yogita in tow, came into the bedroom holding a kettle of chai and 2 cups and saucers. The crash of the dishes was my first signal that they had entered. The maid's screams were my second. The village constable, a baby-faced boy who looked barely older than me, arrived at the same time as my parents. It is the curse, my mother wailed. It has already struck. My father, the more practical of the two, assessed me, no doubt more concerned about the status of my chastity than the corpse lying on my conjugal bed. No Indian father would ever ask such a question to his daughter, but as soon as my mother calmed down, I was sure he would make her do it. He was likely calculating the proper amount of time he should wait before calling Vijay Panditji to see about the boy from Bangalore. Take her, take your unlucky daughter and get out. Prem's father, just home from the leper colony, screamed at my parents. It was your job to protect him, to protect them both, my father countered, before dragging my mother and me out of the house. The constable, with no reason to hold me and every reason to fear my father, let me go. Once home, I went straight to Nitin. He was embracing Kunal, listening to her story about finding me near Prem's body, examining the knife sticking out of his chest. Nitin's reaction, shock, horror, confirmed my worst fears. Kunal had gotten Nitin back and was now making sure he would never want to see me again. The knife has Anjuji's fingerprints on it, Surat sir, the constable said when he came to our house a few days later. My father turned to me, anger and disbelief marking his face. I could see that he was running through the possibilities in his mind. I didn't do it, Papa. God promised, I said, tears welling in my eyes. I thought about it. I planned it, but I never did it, I thought. My daughter never even goes into the kitchen, Constable Pandey. That room is for servants only. You must be mistaken, my father said. The maids, Kunal and Yogita, are telling that they saw her there and that she took the knife from the kitchen. A few of the prints are smudged, that is true, but most are distinguishable. They are definitely those of Anjuji, the constable said. My father paced the room, pulling at the ends of his mustache as he did whenever he was agitated. Several times he started to say something, then shook his head and returned to his pacing. Anjuji was always wanting a marriage of her own choosing, isn't it, sir? She has opposed your efforts in the past, the constable said. The astrologer, Vijay Panditji, is telling this only. My father stopped mid-stride and turned to face the constable. My daughter is barely weighing 45 kilograms. How could she have subdued a man the size of Prem Mukherjee? The young officer stroked his hairless chin as he considered my father's words. Perhaps she had help, he finally said. Are you suggesting my daughter is involved with another man? He spat disdain at the constable with every word. The officer took a step backwards. Sir, you are correct that Anjuji is a small person, which means she would have needed help. Plus, there is the matter of the fingerprints. His voice trailed off as my father's ire rose. That's when the first piece clicked into place. My father was right. It would take more than one person to overcome a man Prem's size. My own plan had been to use the knife when Prem was sleeping, so there would be no struggle. Do you think my daughter is stupid enough to leave her fingerprints on a murder weapon and then stand there next to the body, Constable? No one is that stupid. This time the constable had a ready answer. Someone clever would think that also, isn't it? He said, suggesting that my plan was for people to assume exactly what my father had suggested. The final piece clicked into place. Someone, and I knew just who, wanted me out of the way permanently, not just married off, but off to prison. That way, I could not be a temptation for Nitin. Kunal couldn't wait until I had killed Prem. Who knew how long that might take? She and Yogita must have seen the opportunity when I was handling the knives in the kitchen. Those painchodes spied on me just as I had spied on them. He would have died anyway. It was preordained, my father said as his final salvo, as if Manglik Curse was in the Indian Penal Code as a reason for justifiable homicide. The police took me out through the kitchen in the back of the house so all the neighbors wouldn't gather to watch the spectacle. My mother keened, and my father threatened to end the careers of every police officer in the state. The servants lined up, Kunal on Nitin's arm and Yogita on Sushil's. She's getting what she deserves, Kunal said loudly enough for me to hear when I passed by her. Yogita squeezed Sushil's arm tighter, not caring anymore what Kunal had to say. She had gotten what she wanted out of the deal. How long had she been planning to do this? Sushil asked, new to all of it. Nitin listened to their conversation but didn't participate. He was focused on me, disappointment and confusion filling his gaze. I wanted to tell him I wasn't the one who had killed Prem, but I couldn't talk to him with my parents present. If they discovered our true relationship, he would be sent away, or worse. I had to protect him from their wrath. I know it was the two of you, I shouted at Kunal and Yogita. You wanted me gone. Kunal said nothing in their defense, but instead turned to smile at Yogita. Nitin looked at her, then he studied me. He went back and forth between the two of us, Kunal, gleeful, celebratory, and me, beseeching. I watched as a story seemed to form in Nitin's mind. Was he remembering that I had been with him for much of the night of Prem's murder, but that Kunal had been at Prem's house? Or was he only remembering how many times I had told him I wanted to kill Prem? Would he confront Kunal with his suspicions, threaten to call off their engagement if she did not tell the truth, or would he save himself? Time seemed to stop while I considered everything that Nitin might be contemplating. It wasn't prison that I feared, but losing him. When he finally removed Kunal's hand from his arm and stepped away from her, I knew the truth would one day out. For now, it was enough for me that Nitin knew it. The trial was quick. Even with my family's influence, I was found guilty of culpable homicide and sentenced to spend the rest of my life in prison, exactly what Kunal had hoped for. When, 1 month into my incarceration, I received word of Kunal's confession and subsequent suicide, I assumed that her admission had been given to Nitin in an attempt to win him back, to show him that she had done what she had for him, for them. Or could it have been that Nitin had insisted on getting confirmation of her actions, some sort of an insurance policy that she wouldn't do the same to him one day in exchange for his marrying her? When the police report came back and showed that the knife that had cut Kunal's wrist had her fingerprints on it, slightly smudged but still distinguishable, I had my answer. Nitin did love me, after all.
The Manglik Curse is copyrighted by Smita Harish Jain. Music for this podcast was obtained from purpleplanet.com. Mixing and editing were done by Kevin Wheeler and Jackie Sherbo. You can subscribe to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, where you'll find more stories like this one by visiting our website at elleryqueenmysterymagazine.com.